Hello and welcome to Thursday's live stream here on Viking.TV for Canada and the Great Lakes Week, celebrating the first season of the Viking Octantis and her first cruise doing Canada. So tonight I want to introduce you to someone whose heart is in Canada, but whose work takes her all over the globe and almost under it. The famous filmmaker, director of Titanic, Avatar and The Terminator, James Cameron, has worked with my next guest and has remarked, more people have walked on the moon than have been to some of the places she has gone right here on Earth. And that is certainly true. Inspired by another legendary filmmaker and marine explorer, Jacques Cousteau, she tried scuba diving at something like the age of 16 and never looked back. Her diving career started by working in Tobermory in Canada, which is known as the shipwreck capital of the Great Lakes. She's the first explorer in residence for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, recipient of many medals. The latest one was today. She is a cave diver, underwater explorer, writer, photographer, filmmaker, and campaigner for the health of the planet. She has worked with biologists to identify new species, with physicists to track the impacts of climate change, and with hydrologists to examine freshwater reserves. She has even swum alongside and underneath polar bears. Just look at this. Underneath the polar bear, who was looking very curiously at her, I thought. She is Jill Heinerth. And let's welcome her now to Viking.TV from her home in Ottawa, Canada. Welcome, Jill. It's lovely to see you.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne. It's lovely to see you too.
I have been watching so many of your exploits because they're all on YouTube. I've just been diving into them, if you'll forgive the pun. But cave diving, could you have taken up anything more dangerous?
Oh, yes, it certainly is a dangerous activity. But, you know, just because I do dangerous things doesn't mean that I do them dangerously. So my life is really about problem solving and risk assessment.
Everything I've watched you do reminds me so much because I guess the first time most of us came up to face with the problems and the danger of cave diving, which you know about, but most of us don't, was when we learned about the rescue of those young the soccer team in Thailand who were trapped in that flooded cave. And it was only the absolute expertise of a very few people around the planet who knew how to get them out. That's what brought it home to me, the danger of what you do. You must have been watching that with interest. You must have known most of the people involved.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, these are my brothers from expeditions throughout my lifetime. I'm so proud of the incredible work they did. I was actually in Greenland filming when it happened, so I was not able to go to assist in the rescue, but went on media to try and describe to people around the world what was happening in real time.
I know, that was incredible. And that's why we ordinary people learned how very few people there are on the planet who know what you do, the dangers and the expertise needed to survive in underground caves, underground tunnels that can suddenly be flooded, that can suddenly be a completely different world. You explore an upside down world in a way, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tell people that I'm literally swimming in the veins of Mother Earth because I'm in the lifeblood of the planet, this flowing water that, you know, serves humanity, wildlife, and even all the industries that we require. So I have a kind of an inside look on the planet.
Yeah, it's very, very inside as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just to go back to the footage that I showed just a minute ago, you captured that for Under Thin Ice, which was a CBC documentary and you wanted to be up close and personal to polar bears and swimming almost alongside them. Describe
Yes.
what happened, because that's the most unbelievably dangerous looking thing, but you wanted to get in there.
Well, yeah, it was quite terrifying, honestly. And I really don't know if I would do it again. It's a huge risk because when you roll in the water, the polar bear literally looks at you in the distance and sees your little, you know, neoprene covered head, and you look just like a seal. So he starts swimming towards you at about 10 kilometers per hour. really, with the only intent to eat you. So as he gets close, I let the air out of my buoyancy device so that I could sink beneath him and just capture him swimming overhead. But we don't know the answer to how deep a polar bear can dive if it's really hungry. So that's where the unknowns are.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, we've only just learned what good swimmers polar bears are. We've always imagined them just walking along the ice and the snow, but they are very good swimmers and they can swim for a long time, can't they?
Oh, yes, about 10 days they can swim in the open water without rest or food. So, they're in a difficult situation these days with the loss of sea ice in the north. They are swimming more and hunting new types of food in order to sustain themselves. So, yeah, they're teaching their babies to swim as well.
So when you've got these incredible pictures, I mean, obviously there is such a thing as a long lens. So how absolutely close were you to them?
Pretty close. Yeah, I mean, obviously we use all sorts of lenses, but these days in the Arctic, when there's a polar bear in the area, it through at least curiosity will start moving towards people in groups, and certainly start to predate. And so we need full-time Inuit bear guards that are just constantly watching our camps and ensuring our safety.
I suppose you are in open water to a certain extent, and you say you've got people with you. So if there were any danger, hopefully you'd be able to swim aboard a boat, small boat or a dinghy, and hopefully get out of the way. But
yes, it's not quick though.
They could go for you, couldn't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a colleague of mine, Amos Nachum, who has swam with polar bears, said that one chased him down to about 18 meters. And that's hard for me to imagine. But when the polar bear started diving after me, I didn't give him the chance. I went very deep until I heard like a recall rev of the engine to let me know that it was safe to surface again.
But all the time, not only are you swimming with them using your scuba skills and your natural curiosity, but you're also trying to take really cool pictures. Mm-hmm. So where did those two careers coincide? The ability to take really fantastic pictures and also the ability to know what you're doing to take you into that sort of environment.
Yeah. Well, as a little girl, I was always this little water explorer. So I always loved being outdoors and engaging in exploration. And I'm also an artist. So my formal, university career studies are in fine art. And as a young person, I was always eagerly sketching and carrying a camera. And my first career out of university was actually running an advertising company. But I was teaching scuba on nights and weekends and realized that I needed to find a way to apply my creative talents underwater rather than at a desk, because I just can't live indoors. I need to be out in the world.
But you must have learned how to use cameras and underwater cameras too, to the highest ability.
Yes, well, I'm very much self-taught in that arena, because as I chose to find a way to create a career as an underwater explorer, first of all, there were no internet resources. When I wanted to learn more, I was reading books and writing letters and sending photographs and writing to magazines through the post to see if I could have something accepted for publication. So, yeah, it was difficult, but a lot of self-teaching and experimentation along the way.
Well, as you say, you had to self-teach, but nowadays what you do is Google Jill Heinerth, because she tells you on YouTube. I've been watching so much of it, but the dangers involved. I mean, more people apparently have died exploring underwater caves than have died trying to get up to the top and down again of Mount Everest. Mm-hmm. So, you have a taste for danger, or what?
Well, it's funny. People think that I'm fearless and that I engage in this as some sort of an adrenaline rush, and it's really not that at all. I have to be scared every time I go diving because that's what keeps me safe, and that represents a recognition that I'm taking on a risky endeavor. So safety is of the utmost importance to me. And in terms of adrenaline, there's not really space for that underwater either, because I have to kind of set the emotions on the shelf while I go off and do these very difficult task loading things. And that's the only way that I'm able to kind of come back safely, is to engage a pragmatic, safety oriented brain to do this.
Yeah, so it's obviously to a certain extent pride, and maybe the adrenaline comes from just knowing what you're doing, and that's experience. We've got a little clip of one of your videos about Bahama blue holes, which you can probably explain to us a bit more in a minute. But this is where you explain to us that you get asked this question all the time: why on earth would you do it? Let's have a look at this.
We get asked this all the time. Why on earth would you want to go cave diving? Most people think of caves and they think of a doorway filled with blackness. But for us, it's a portal to discovery, a place that allows us to swim inside the veins of Mother Earth. While we swim in these magnificent galleries, we're swimming through museums of natural history, through places that can teach us about Earth's past and Earth's future. It's a privilege to swim in these incredible environments and take in the majestic beauty that few people will ever have an opportunity to see. These caves are filled with crystalline beauty, with animals that have never been seen before, ancient swimming dinosaurs that can teach us about evolution and survival. The spaces inside our planet are filled with life, and with life-giving sustenance that feeds the planet and all of humankind. Cave diving is certainly not for everyone, but my colleagues and I pinch ourselves every day. We think we have the most beautiful office in the world, and we are incredibly grateful to the citizens of Abaco and the Bahamas for embracing us and bringing us into this incredible environment so that we can share the beauty, the art, and the science of underwater caves.
Jill, I video because it shows the beauty of those amazing caves, but also the people who surround it. So when you go on a dive like that, it's not just about the caves and the job you're doing, it's also about the people who are around there and sort of absorbing the culture.
Absolutely. I mean, as explorers, we're, writing handbooks to do things that haven't been done before. We're making maps so that others can follow. But the most important thing is to share that with people and give them a chance to see something that they would never get a chance to experience otherwise. And I think in that sharing, especially working with children in whatever region of the world that we're working in, is, those create some of the most special memories for me. They're treasured.
But what is amazing about what you do is that you are diving down and you are experiencing and now filming, thank God, for the rest of us who don't want to do the dive, you are experiencing going into a place that, frankly, no other human has actually ever been before. Can you explain to us what that feels like?
Oh, it's quite extraordinary to go to an unexplored place. I mean, as a child, I wanted to be an astronaut. I know you did too. But, we grew up watching the Apollo missions, these, men landing on the moon for the first time. And that's what I feel like when I'm going to these unexplored places. And that's why, for me, it's really important to bring a camera, because I want to share those experiences.
But nobody else has ever been there before. Mm-hmm. You those extraordinary places with the first human eyes ever, probably.
Absolutely.
But you put yourself through extraordinary danger sometimes doing that, because I know that you dived, or dove, sorry, I don't know what the right word is, dived, I think, inside a glacier. Inside an iceberg, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, inside an iceberg in Antarctica. I was actually the first person to ever cave dive inside an iceberg. And this one was the largest iceberg ever to calve away from Antarctica. Like, it was the size of Jamaica. So a huge piece of ice. And we went to engage the iceberg and do some science around it, land on top of it, and then cave dive inside it to see what we would find.
Well, the very idea, and I used the word glacier by accident, but in a way it is a bit like that. I don't think most of us would ever think, we always think of an iceberg as being a solid piece of ice. But the idea that it's an environment almost of its own and that it has tunnels that you were going to be able to explore, well, A, sounds very dangerous and it's very, very new. Were you aware? Well, you must obviously have been aware of the danger that you were putting yourself in, but the environment around you could have changed at any moment and did.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it was just a hypothesis when we pitched the project to National Geographic, but I looked at these, great bodies of ice and I thought, well, it's just like limestone. Limestone is dissolved to create the caves that I swim through. And I thought, well, the ice is going to be changing at a faster rate and there have to be caves and tunnels in there. But indeed, we experienced incredible dangers. We experienced ice calving that closed the doorway that we'd gone into. We experienced ferocious currents that pinned us down inside the iceberg. So every day was a learning experience, experiencing new natural phenomenon that we hadn't seen before.
So hang on. So you experienced the closing of your entrance. And
yes.
You basically trapped inside an iceberg, a huge iceberg, as you said, size of Jamaica, not knowing if there was a way out, and currents that even stopped you swimming the way you wanted to swim.
Yes. I mean, we heard and felt the sound of the ice calving away when the doorway was blocked. I heard and felt this great rumbling that resonated through my sternum. It was powerful, but I was not aware of what was going on until we swam back all the way to where we'd gone in to discover the doorway was closed. Yeah.
I can understand that training and expertise in the end got you out, but there must have been fear. Do you experience fear sometimes, or claustrophobia?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. I'm terrified and scared with every dive, especially new ones, but I have to rehearse, practice, and envision all the things that could go wrong in a dive, deal with those mentally before the dive, so that when I get underwater, then I can just stay focused on the task at hand. But sure, during the dive, there are still things that can happen that are terrifying, like that. And your heart will immediately race and your respirations will speed up and, the chattering monkeys in your head just explode into a million conversations. And at that point, you really have to be able to take that very deep cleansing breath and set the emotions aside to figure out your best course for survival.
Breathe, as they say. At that point, are you in contact with anyone on the surface?
No, I mean, that's the thing about underwater caves. There's no mission control to call for help. So you're on your own. You have to solve everything and you have to get into the water knowing that there'll be nobody to come get you if something goes wrong.
So how did you get out?
Well, on the first occasion when the doorway closed, we just started searching as we do in cave diving. Like if we've lost the line or become disoriented, we just started searching and found another way around these huge blocks of ice to get out. It just took us a little bit longer, and we got pretty cold in the process.
Yeah, well, it's a simplistic question, but I was going to say, don't you get incredibly cold? And of course, always you are limited by the amount of oxygen you're carrying on your back.
Well, and that was one of the things that saved us in that day. I was very stubborn about using a particular life support technology called a rebreather. And that gives you a lot more time to solve your problems because you are reusing your consumables, basically. Your oxygen molecules get metabolized by the body, but that breathing gas still has extra oxygen that you're exhaling that can be recycled to use again. So that technology was critically important to keeping us a tiny bit warmer and giving us the time to find our way out.
So a rebreather uses some of the oxygen that you're breathing out and feeding back in.
It's exactly the same technology that an astronaut wears for a spacewalk, in fact. So much different than a normal scuba tank where you would exhale bubbles into the environment and lose some precious gas that could be reused.
But you've also said, I think, that the beauty contradicts the danger. And if we look at some of the pictures that you've taken, I mean, you can see how the beauty must be captivating. I've also heard astronauts say the same thing, that sometimes when they're doing spacewalks, they are so captivated by what they're seeing, the Earth beneath them, that they sort of forget what they're doing and have to be talked back into the spaceship. And it's almost as though you've said the same thing. The beauty contradicts the danger.
Yes. Oh, it's a stunningly beautiful and new and different environment. And, I remember on one cave diving expedition when my partner called the dive, and that, like, we give a thumbs up signal, and that's a command signal, like we're going home. And you never ask why, you just obey. And so he called the dive. And when we got home, I looked in, or like got out of the cave, I looked in his notebook and it said, called on account of beauty. So we had surveyed 1,000 feet of new passages that nobody had ever seen before. And he was so awestruck by the beauty that he just said, this is a good day. Let's just go home.
Yeah, tempting fate almost to stay. Yeah. You've been looking into the life cycle of ice. And again, to the ordinary viewer at the moment, me too, it's only something we're beginning to understand, but I know you guys have been talking about it for years. The Royal Canadian Geographic Society's Arctic on the Ice expedition shows is looking into the flow of ice. And I know you're very much involved. What is all that about? Can you explain it in ways we would understand?
Sure. Well, if anyone's ever traveled to a place like Illilasat, Greenland, and watched the icebergs calving away from the Greenland ice sheet, well, those magnificent icebergs that move out into Disco Bay and out into Davis Strait cross the Atlantic and come to rest north of Baffin Island in Canada. They get locked up in the sea ice, and they spend a winter there until the sea ice breaks up in the summer season, and then the icebergs begin their journey south down Baffin Island, the coast of Labrador, by the Torn Gap Mountains, and then down to Newfoundland, where people get a chance to see them in their last days before they completely melt and break up and dissolve back into the sea. But that's one of the incredible opportunities, is for people to see them in Newfoundland, and every one of them is an endangered species. It's going to dissolve away into the sea, and this moving piece of art transforms and changes itself by the minute and by the hour with the wind and the rain and the warmth.
So, how did it all begin for you? Were you hooked from the very... I said that you were inspired by Jacques Cousteau, and you wanted to take up scuba diving, and you did, and you obviously liked it and were very good at it. You must have been hooked then from there on to try and do something underwater.
Oh, I had the heart of a diver even before I first breathed with scuba. I remember telling my parents I wanted to learn to dive, and they said, "Oh dear, I don't think people dive in Canada. It's just too cold." But they had no frame of reference, and so my whole young life, I just kept reading about and looking at stories and sitting in the basement with National Geographics piled around me. And I was just always trying to find a way. How does one become an underwater explorer? And one of my first things was to go to a commercial diving workshop. Like, could I be a commercial diver? And the instructor there just turned to me and said, "Dear, there are no women in commercial diving. If you just want to go train dolphins, there's another way to do that." So there were a lot of barriers in my way in those early days, and I had to forge my own path.
Well, we've got a lovely video here which celebrates you being the first explorer in residence of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Let's have a look at this now, because you sort of explain in it how you started out as a little girl, just very, very enthused about the whole business. Look, there you are, young, little one, growing up, and then getting involved more and more in the underwater experience, and then meeting James Cameron there, my goodness, and all of these amazing adventures you've been on.
hmm I'm very privileged to have had so many incredible opportunities, and it's an enormous honor for me to serve as the first explorer in residence for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. It's a little girl's dream come true to be recognized for efforts in exploration. It's very exciting, and
Well,
and
it's
it
great.
also gives me a vehicle to share these things with young
Yes.
kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a good videographer and photographer, you're able to record that for the rest of us, and that's a very important thing because not all of us can do what you do.
Absolutely. I love sharing, the cultural heritage, as well as important images that help tell stories of climate change and water issues and natural resource protection efforts.
Now, how did you get to meet James Cameron?
Well, that was a wonderful project. He was working on starting to use 3D cameras for getting ready for Avatar, basically. And he shot a film called Sanctum, which is about a cave diving incident. It's based on a true story. And so he wanted to refine the use of the camera, but also learn about cave diving. So I had a chance to take him on his very first cave dives and then act as a stunt double as he was trying to work out what looked interesting in 3D on camera.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he's obviously caught the bug somewhere along the
Oh,
line.
he is an extraordinary underwater explorer, and really a lot of his Hollywood stuff is just the meat and potatoes to earn the money to allow him to do some of his underwater exploration work, like going to the deepest point in the ocean in Challenger Deep. Yeah.
Absolutely. He's obsessive about it now, isn't he? Which is why he so much enjoys working with people such as you. Now, let's go to the Great Lakes, because that's what we're talking about so much this week. Why is it the sort of shipwreck capital of the world? Why are there so many shipwrecks in the Great Lakes?
Well, there may be as many as 30 to 35,000 shipwrecks that have gone down in the Great Lakes, and we know of about 6,000 to 7,000 of those locations. But the lakes are known really for difficult conditions, especially in the fall, like late fall. But in the early days, this was our highway. So ships carried commodities, and before settlement, the indigenous Canadians used these as their highways for trade and the movement of commodities. But with a shorter spacing between waves, those fall storms can be pretty spectacular, and a few ships have gone down as a result.
Yeah, it's amazing that the Great Lakes should be such a shipwreck capital. But of course, it's wonderful meat and potatoes for anyone who wants to dive, because diving on shipwrecks is amazing, isn't it? It's like a voyage of discovery again.
Every shipwreck has an important story about the people, about whatever it was carrying, or maybe where it was going for the first time. So the shipwreck tales and the storytelling heritage in the Great Lakes is huge. Shipwreck tales.
Yeah, when you dive, and I know obviously it's a very technical thing that you're doing the right thing and you're diving and you're exploring this amazing shipwreck, but you must come across little things, little artifacts that it's like a cord that mean something about the human being who left that behind, or the technology of the time. Also, can you tell us any of those interesting stories that you must have come across in the time that struck a chord, maybe struck your heart?
Yeah, fortunately here in Canada, we have very strong protection of shipwrecks. And so, when we see things, we don't touch them. We don't remove them. I mean, these are literally underwater museums in a way, but many places are also graves or war graves in many cases. But yes, we can see things like a phonograph record, or we've actually even found very precious artifacts like sextants on shipwrecks in Newfoundland. So yes, you can see tools or a potbelly stove with pots still on it on shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. So amazing opportunity. They're very well preserved.
And you must wonder about the drama of the situation that caused it to wreck, and whether the people who put that pot on the stove survived. Amazing, isn't it? The stories behind those wrecks.
Oh, we always make a point of knowing the stories and sharing the stories before people dive there, because I think it increases their sort of reverence and respect, and also their wish to conserve and protect the heritage for others.
What I'm amazed about is by some of your photographs is the visibility seems to be much better than I would have thought. I would have thought most of your photographs would be a bit murky, but they're not. Some of them are really high def and very clear water. How do you explain that?
Well, one thing that's interesting in regard to the Great Lakes is when I learned to dive over 30 years ago, the Great Lakes maybe had less than 2 meters of visibility was quite common. So there was so much particulate in the water that we didn't see very far. Like we could go to the bottom of the anchor from our boat and a shipwreck might be 2 meters away and we couldn't see it. But invasive species that came from the Caspian Sea, these zebra mussels and quagga mussels that came in the ballast water of ships, has caused an explosion of invasive mussels. And those have filtered the Great Lakes. And now the visibility can be, 30 to 50 meters underwater. You can see great distances and the daylight penetrates much further.
So normally we sort of condemn invasive species, but in this case, they've actually done a good job.
Well, they've made the water clearer, so photographers are happy, and anyone riding on the subs on a Viking cruise ship is going to be blown away. But it's not too good for the natural environment because they have outcompeted the native species. So it's not a win-win. Yeah.
No, there's always another story, isn't there? Yeah. So you're a photographer and you are an amazing photographer and videographer and an amazing diver. So if we look at some of your best ever pictures, and I know this is something that anyone who wants to look further on YouTube, you always tell the story behind the image. Tell us a few stories behind some of the most amazing images we'll look at now.
Oh gosh. Well, that one I shot for the cover of my memoir, Into the Planet. And that is the precise location where I suffered from a decompression illness hit, the bends. And in that location underwater, I felt the first symptoms of a nearly career-ending diving accident. So I went back in 2018 to that very spot where I first knew that my career might be over and shot this photo for the cover of my book.
Now, what are we looking at exactly?
This is a cave called the Pit that my husband and I discovered the deep cave passages nearly 400 feet deep from this entranceway. And we're looking at a sunbeam that's just penetrating through the water from the daylight. And the cave entrances are deep below where that little diver is, beneath a cloud of hydrogen sulfide. So hydrogen sulfide gas suspended in the water that creates like a witch's cauldron effect.
Well, that's the other thing is you don't know what's happening down there. So, I mean, there are, well, you know the terms, but there are all sorts of hidden dangers and hidden objects and things that, and I always think a lot of it's spiky. There are stalactites, stalagmites, all the rest of it looks very spiky. You have to be very careful of where you're swimming, don't you?
Well, all of those calcite formations, the speleothems, stalactites and stalagmites, they're quite delicate. They were formed when that cave was dry. So when the water table and ocean levels were lower on the planet. And now that they're water filled, they're supported a little bit. But if you bump into something, it will break. And of course, broken forever. It's like destroying a piece of art in a gallery.
Yeah. And it does look like you're swimming in a gallery of art sometimes.
And
there is a wreck. And that is amazing because that's just so poignant, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a basically fully intact shipwreck in the Dominican Republic. Actually, if you're landing in the airplane at the airport and you look really carefully, you just might see this offshore. It's very close to the airport. And you can see how shipwrecks also become artificial reefs because there are anemones and corals and all kinds of aquatic life that will stick to the metal and grow and create a magnet for other life.
Which is what makes it so interesting for the diver as well. But it's also, I don't know, it's amazingly reassuring that nature sort of takes over as well.
It does, yeah.
Wow, where's that?
This is a shipwreck in Tobermory. So this is a Great Lakes wreck. One of the very first shipwrecks that I ever dove in Tobermory. It's quite shallow and people visit it on glass bottom boats and in kayaks and snorkeling because it's only about 6 to 7 meters deep. and it gives us a chance to see something, even if we're not divers.
And those colours, Jill, are true.
Yeah,
The colours, they're just incredible.
it is beautiful water.
My goodness, it is, but cold.
Well, yes. I mean, the Great Lakes will be on the bottom 4 degrees all year round, but closer to the surface these days, people that snorkel will find temperatures, 18 to 21 in the summertime in many places in the Great Lakes, or even warmer in the St. Lawrence. So it can be quite appealing, almost like a swimming pool.
I was going to say, which do you prefer, warm water or cold water?
Well, it's always nice to jump into warm water, and it's so easy because I can wear so much less equipment. But I would say that the best diving in the world is in Canada, and some of the most incredible opportunities that I've had have been in cold water.
We've got some pictures of you diving in the Caribbean, and it does look fantastic. And you also found some amazing wildlife inside the caves. Let's look at the video you made of your time in Cuba. Have a look at this.
Oh, sure.
Now we're looking here at your work in Cuba. What's going on here? What are we seeing?
Well, we're actually taking soil samples here. So it's like a core that we press down into the soil. And we're also surveying this remain, which is an extinct sloth that's pretty much embedded in the floor. So we're exploring this cave and mapping it for the first time, and we've discovered extinct animals. We've also uncovered some early human remains in Cuba. And here we're camping out with a local family on the northern part of the Zapata swamp in a place where this family has a completely sustainable ranch. So, I mean, they grew the coffee beans and the sugar that made our coffee. And every day they were making food that they were foraging and growing on their own in the bush. And it's great when we have a chance to spend time with families like this.
Yeah, so you're spending time absorbing the culture on shore. And then you're diving down and exploring things that they would never know. And as you said, fossils or bones. Animals that there before.
Many important, cultural and historic resources that we're discovering. And we're working with the Natural History Museum and archaeologists in Cuba so that they're doing all of the lead on the academic research and work. But there are many future potentials that this could lead to for Cubans, like if they choose to use these as an attraction for tourists, that could be very beneficial to a green economy for them in the future.
But again, you abide by this code that if you find something, you photograph it, you video it, but you don't bring it up?
Yes, in most cases, it's actually against the law also to remove, disturb, or damage a cultural artifact. So we used to, through a very long permitting processes, be able to bring some of these artifacts to scientists who had the right permit. But what we decided to do was also develop better technology so we didn't have to do that. So now we do a very high resolution scanning of objects in place in the cave, and we bring back the data so that we can create virtual reality, augmented reality, holographic references that are a much better detail than even bringing the actual object to the scientists could offer.
But what is it like? I mean, you're swimming along. Yes, you're looking at the caves and all stalagmites and stalactites and all the rest of it. And then you discover something that nobody's ever seen before, like basically a dinosaur fossil or a dinosaur bones. That must be so exciting.
Oh, it's amazing. And sometimes we don't know exactly what we found. We have to document, draw, photograph, scan, and create these assets and research for a long time to find out, what it is that we've discovered. But it is very exciting. I'm sorry.
And when you do that, can you talk to each other? Or is it all just, sign language to each other?
Sign language, light signals. We also will write notes to each other. And on occasion, we'll use full face masks with microphones when we're making a movie and we want to record audio in real time. But it creates a lot more equipment to use and more risk. So we don't use the full face masks as much.
And how long is the average dive? How long is it safe to stay under exploring?
Many of my dives are in the 1 to 2 hour range. A lot of my dives will, like more technical dives, will go to the sort of 3 hour, but my longest dive is 22 hours.
Was that inside the iceberg?
No, that was a very special mission where I was running a 3-dimensional mapping device in a cave system in Florida, and it was a very deep cave system. So 5 hours was sort of the work time or the bottom time of the dive, and then there was 17 hours of very slow return to surface pressure to allow my body to reacclimate to the surface.
And that's where you have to learn the discipline, and you have learned it over the years, of only being able to come up very, very slowly.
Yes.
Safeguard yourself. My goodness, 22 hours. That's quite some dive. Tell me about the Bianca Sea.
Oh, sure. Yeah. In Grenada, very interesting wreck. I'm actually headed back to Grenada soon to do a little more photography and video work. Grenada is kind of like the cradle of the Caribbean. I like to think of it that way. So not only do we have this beautiful shipwreck that's just adorned with life, but it's a real magnet for schooling fish and other, larger marine life. So quite something. I mean, that's the side of a shipwreck, and you wouldn't even know there's a wreck under there. It's just all life. Yeah.
I was going to ask you what it is. It looks incredible, and we can see a diver there in the distance, but that looks amazing. And again, that's the way Mother Nature has sort of taken over a shipwreck.
Yeah, and as soon as we turn our lights on, I mean, the water absorbs the light and the color, but when we turn a light onto a wreck, then all of a sudden we see an explosion of red and yellow and orange. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, which is, again, something you see, and the rest of us don't really know about until you bring your hands out, that underwater there is the most incredible, colourful planet that so few of us know about. Tell me about the global initiative, We Are Water. What's that about?
Oh, yes. My husband and I started a project called We Are Water, which is trying to help people understand where their water comes from. Because when you ask most people, they'll say, it comes from the tap. But I want people to have a deeper understanding of where their drinking water comes from, how they can protect it for future generations, and how they can use less, because we all unintentionally use quite a lot of water these days. And it's a big problem. We're not running out of water on the planet. What we're running out of is clean sources that we can all afford.
Yeah, some of us misuse water, don't we? I mean, we use chlorinated, healthy drinking water to wash our cars, whilst other parts of the planet don't have enough water to drink, safe water anyway, which is incredible. And we've got to have more respect for water, because it's what allegedly started life on the planet in the first place. You've written several books, and there are so many videos online that people can look at where you are teaching people about what you do and why it's important to understand what you do. But one of the books you wrote is called Women Underwater. I just wonder why you chose to make it about women underwater. Is life for women divers different from life for men divers?
It's very different. I mean, I'm still oftentimes the only woman on a boat or the only woman on a project. And that's changing, which is great. But I think when we can offer support to other women and help them to aspire to careers in the ocean environment and the water environment, then that's really helpful. Because when I started, we didn't have women's equipment. We didn't have answers for women's specific issues. And so this book was meant to really be a resource for women divers and help them to succeed.
That's interesting, because if you ask women astronauts, they say the same about their business, is that the astronaut world was designed for men who are larger framed. All of the astronaut outfits and everything were for men. All of the technologies that support life were for men. And the women had to either put up with it or say, hang on a minute, no, this has to be redesigned. Women have a part in this world. And you've had to do the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, early in my career, I was running around diving shows and talking to different manufacturers and saying, with a measuring tape, and saying, look, our torsos are shorter, our shoulders are sloped, our necks are smaller. And these are all hypercritical things for not just the comfort, but the safety of equipment and life support. Yeah. Yeah. Not to mention, things like dealing with, very human issues, like how am I going to pee if I'm wearing a dry suit for 22 hours? And so, it really became kind of crowdsourced answers, women speaking with other women and helping each other out, and it still is.
Gosh, that's amazing, isn't it? Your latest book is called Into the Planet. We've got a lovely video here which sort of explains what it's about, but you can do more. Let's have a look at the video first, though. This is your sort of trailer for Into the Planet.
If you only heard my voice, you would not guess my career. My workplace frightens most people. And if you got inside my head, you would meet the ghosts of dozens of my friends who have lost their lives in the blackness of underwater caves. What I do is really dangerous, but it's worth it. In my work, I've had a chance to touch the void, reaching places inside the planet where nobody has ever been before. In a workday, I might swim below your home, through conduits in volcanoes, or cracks in the world's largest iceberg. You might find me roaming the Sahara Desert, documenting lost warships, or exploring mystical caves full of the remains of ancient civilizations. Working with scientists, I've helped discover new species, documented our Earth's changing climate, and filmed with technology destined for space.
That just starts to explain what Into the Planet is about. You say you work in a world most people would absolutely fear. So thank God you're there doing it for us. But you have you found little creatures that you call little tiny dinosaurs almost, and also swum with seals and dolphins and whales and all the rest of it. It's extraordinary. Tell me about these little creatures you found that you call little dinosaurs.
Sure. There are animals that live in underwater caves, so they live their entire life cycle in the blackness. And we call them living, swimming dinosaurs because they haven't evolved in over 65 million years, meaning they predate the extinction of the dinosaurs. And these little crustaceans, some of them have, venomous fangs and pincers and can attack something 40 times its size, turn its guts into jello and feed off it over time, because this, cave system is a very food scarce environment for it to live in. Yeah. So these are pretty amazing animals that may give us clues about evolution and survival, or perhaps even be the source of unique properties or chemicals that could lead to medical cures or other new ingredients for other things that we would use.
So without bringing them up to the surface, how is your data made useful to the biologists above?
Well, when we find an animal that we don't think has ever been recorded or described for science, we have to collect 3 of them so that a specialized taxonomist can describe the animal. We'll also usually take one for DNA analysis just to confirm. But there are also scientists who specialize in things like bioprospecting. So we have discovered that, for instance, sponges that are inside of caves may have a much higher antimicrobial and anti-cancer agent than the same sponges that live just meters away outside the cave. So many biologists are looking at this. Astrobiologists are looking at this life as perhaps something that might more closely resemble what we would find in space. So many different specialists are interested in our work these days.
So you're working and you're diving, you're doing something interesting that looks fabulous to you, but months and months and months, maybe years later, you might realize that actually what you discovered is really cool to the biologists, the medics.
Oh, well, wow. Yeah, I mean, in a way, my work is kind of hit and run. I may be collecting or doing work, surveying or describing things for them, and then I deliver the package to them that could potentially be the rest of their life's work. And then I move on to something else. So, I'm doing a lot of different things, but creating a lot of work for others.
Well, yet again, you're a bit like the astronauts who walked on the moon and took samples back. You don't know what's going to turn out from just that one mission, do you? But you clearly love a lot of the wildlife you come across. I mean, even swimming up close to those polar bears who are looking at you, as though you might actually be food. Those wonderful pictures you took of the polar bears that we saw at the beginning there, you clearly love the animals that you discover and find and swim alongside.
Well, it's an incredible privilege when you get to swim alongside something that's, bigger than you. I mean, the first thought that always goes through my head when I see something like these mobile arrays in the Azores, or see those sea lions off British Columbia, and I see them swimming around and playing and working as a family unit, the first thing that pops into my head is, take me to your leader.
Oh. If only you could speak. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me, who's Chester the manatee?
Oh, well, I wrote a book called Chester the Manatee and the Incredibly, Terribly, Terribly Bad Itch. So manatees are having great difficulty these days because of the loss of their habitat. Basically, the Crystal River is no longer crystal. The bottom vegetation that they used to eat is now basically eradicated. And plus, they're having issues, and we see manatees rolling around on the bottom, like scratching their backs on the bottom of the river. So I wrote a story about a manatee that was itchy and how it asks a little girl for help to clean its environment.
Yeah, you've written a couple of children's books at least, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Aquanaut is my most recent one, and that's for ages like 3 to 7. It's a picture book to inspire kids to be explorers.
And we got a lovely selfie you took recently of yourself with some sea lions around you. So like I said, you obviously, the ability to discover what you discover is one thing, but to just be brushing up close to the wildlife around you must be very exciting. That must be almost spiritual.
Oh, it is. It's very moving. I mean, at this time of year, those sea lions out in British Columbia were waiting and waiting and waiting for the herring spawn because they get all excited about that annual buffet. And while they're waiting, it's a really good time for us to go there, roll into the water, and they just appear. We'll be quite far from their little sort of rookery, and they'll peel off into the water and swim up to us with curiosity and sometimes even truly want to play.
Yeah, they've got that look about them.
Mm-hmm.
And you capture it. That's the amazing thing. You're going to be coming aboard a Viking ship soon, I think, on the Great Lakes, which will be a wonderful experience for you, as for everybody aboard as well, because you know the Great Lakes so well. But on this beautiful, new, fantastic ship, you'll be able to explain everything to everybody around you. You must be looking forward to that.
Oh, I am so excited about it. I mean, just hearing all of the, the amenities and the design on the ship, it just sounds like it's going to be an incredible experience of not just, luxury, but incredible engagement with the community and the activities and the life of the Great Lakes.
Yes, the life of the Great Lakes.
Home. Yeah, my home.
Yes, it's your home, but most people, so many people want to know about it and don't know what you know about it. We've got lots of questions from Viking viewers for you, if you wouldn't mind answering a few.
Sure.
Aaron in Louisiana says, many of the images you've captured are iconic. Do you have an image that's most special to you?
Ooh, wow, so interesting. Well, I really think the cover of my book is very special because it's such a beautiful place. It's a cave that I explored, but it also represents a point in my life when I thought my career might have been over, and I overcame and was able to continue. So, yeah, I think that's the one.
It's amazing. Frank and Sally in Montana, what have been your proudest moments? All right, so this is a difficult one, I know, for anyone, but if there was a proudest moment, what would it be?
Well, when John Geiger from the Royal Canadian Geographical Society asked me to be the explorer in residence, he said, what do you want to do with this role? And I said, I just want to be the woman I wish I had met when I was 10 years old. And so when I have a little kid that comes up to me and says, I want to be an explorer when I grow up, I'm just like, this is it. These are the moments that we will treasure.
Yeah. And you're able to say you can do it because I did it.
Mm-hmm.
The award that you have just been presented with, and you have been the recipient of many awards. What do those sort of awards mean to you?
Oh, it's an affirmation that's an incredible honor. And, today as the recipient of the William Beebe Prize from the Explorers Club, I believe I'm the first woman to receive this incredible honor. And I guess it's a little overwhelming. I mean, we all sort of feel a little bit of imposter syndrome in our life, right? And so it's like, wow, I really did do that. So it's beautiful. And for me, this weekend is just all about my sister and I sharing this together, and it's great.
Is she a diver?
No, I did take her on what's called a Discover Scuba experience, and she loved it. But it's not her world. But it was nice for her to give it a try. Yeah.
Oh my, yeah, that must be wonderful. Samantha in Edinburgh says, what would be your advice for anyone wanting to try out scuba diving for the first time?
Oh, I would say just do it.
Do it.
Honestly, I mean, people can start as young as 10 now, and there are professional instructors all around the world, and you can try it anywhere. But just know you can do it. Being able to breathe underwater is like a superpower. And when you feel that gravity is gone and that you and anyone else that goes into the underwater world is going to experience this feeling of equality, any size, culture, gender, age, or whatever is equally graceful. We are all mermaids. So it's very empowering. Just do it.
It turns you into a 3D person, doesn't it? And that's what I couldn't quite get my head around when I did scubaing. But you said that when you were swimming with the polar bears and you reckoned that the best way to get out of their way was to go down. That's something that we don't normally have walking around on the top of the planet. You have the ability to have that third dimension.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, for me as a young child that liked to go into dry cave systems or, moist, dirty cave systems, whatever, not underwater. It's hard work climbing and pulling your body against the gravity, but when you do it underwater, you just take an inhaled breath and you rise up and you move through this gallery, this space that sometimes, filled with light coming in the doorway. It's like a cathedral.
Well, yes, it does look like it. A lot of the pictures look like cathedrals, don't they? Paul and Felix, they describe themselves as two very keen divers living in Puerto Rico, ask, how do you deal with fear? Do you have a method you can recommend?
Yep, I bring the fear in. Like, it's good to be scared, and I want to dive with people that are scared, so I'll happily go diving with you. But what you do before the dive is you say, what could possibly go wrong? And you can make that list in your head and then go, oh, well, if that goes wrong, I do this. If that goes wrong, I do this. If this goes wrong, gosh, I've got a backup thing to breathe on. And so the last thing you ask yourself, am I capable of rescuing myself here? Am I capable of helping out someone else? Do I feel like I'm in a good environment with good people? And if the answer is yes, then you can set aside the fear and just enjoy it. It's like getting on a roller coaster and turning that fear into excitement.
Bill Ackerson then picks up on that in a way. Bill Ackerson from London. Have you ever had to make the big decision to call off a dive midway?
Absolutely. That is the number one rule of survivors, is to know when to turn around and to abort the dive. I mean, I have to be willing to spend a lot of, money on a production or, a film job and go halfway around the world. And then if something's not right, I have to be willing to turn around, despite the fact that someone might be angry that I didn't come back with the goods.
And that's, again, where experience and training comes in. You have to have confidence to be able to say, no, this is no. You hear Everest climbers doing the same thing, don't you? Anna in Oslo says, if a dive takes too long, isn't there a concern about literally freezing to death or frostbite?
Well, I mean, certainly some of the waters that I'm diving in are like minus 1.8. So cold is certainly one of the risks that we consider. And I have had dry suits flood in that cold temperature, but I have to, wear technical undergarments that might be extraordinarily uncomfortable, but I know I can survive in. So it is all about the planning, really.
Yeah, and knowing your equipment really inside out. I presume before you actually do a dive, you personally check all your equipment again. I mean, I know you will have experts around you, but presumably when it comes, it's the equipment that's going to keep you alive. So presumably you do the tests yourself.
It's very important for me to, take self-responsibility and ensure that I know that everything's right, because I would never want the weight of that to bear on someone else's soul. If they prepared equipment for me, I didn't check it, and then something happened to me. No, I wouldn't want someone to have to live with that. So I will check all of my own gear and take my own responsibility for it.
I understand that. Alan from West Lothian in Scotland says, we've heard you talk about coming across bones of animals, old animals, or fossils, if you like. Have you ever come across frozen animals?
No. I mean, we see like frozen remains, certainly like when a polar bear will hunt. If it hunts seals, it will stick its talons into a hole where a seal would normally breathe. It pulls the seal out. And yet there'll be other holes nearby where the rest of the seal's family is poking their heads up to breathe. And a polar bear is disciplined enough that it will bury that first kill in a snowbank so that the birds can't get to it, let it freeze, and then it'll go off and hunt while the hunting is good. And then afterwards start to consume those remains in snow piles. So we do sometimes see snow piles with frozen remains.
Yeah. Oh God! And at one point you might have actually been there. You might have been there yourself, because Alma and Ed in Michigan say the iceberg that you were in, you were trapped in for a while, later collapsed. They gather. They watched a video. Would that have killed you if you'd stayed inside it and it would have collapsed, or would that have released you?
No, I probably would have been killed by that collapse, because the entire iceberg that we'd just been inside of mere hours before literally started to break apart and crack and fall apart until all we could see were large blocks of ice and brash ice as far as the eye could see. And I think, hit by even a small piece of that, I probably would have been crushed or killed. Yeah.
When you look back on that now, do you consider that a near-death experience?
Oh, absolutely. When I came out of that last cave dive in the iceberg, we had been trapped because of the currents that eventually ripped that iceberg apart.
Yeah.
And narrowly escaped after extending the dive long beyond what I was planning for. And I swam back to the boat, and the first thing I said to the scientist was, "The cave tried to keep us today."
Mm. And how long did it take before you got back in the water?
Oh, well, we were actually planning to get back in the water, and we were preparing our gear and waiting for the current to slacken so we could do another dive when the entire iceberg exploded. So at that point, with the iceberg exploded, we said it's time to go. Yeah.
The icebergs called it a day. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Back to New Zealand.
Yeah. Back in Patrick in Lisbon says, I saw you on YouTube saying there is no doubt our world is heading towards an ice-free future. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, every year that we go north to the Arctic, the sea ice is setting up later and breaking apart earlier. We're losing the sea ice. It's thinner and thinner, and that dark ocean is absorbing more heat, creating a feedback cycle that's rapidly causing the loss of sea ice. So yeah, I mean, as an ice-free Arctic is probably within my lifetime, but as we start to lose other ice sheets, it's quite worrying.
Yeah, that changes the world a lot, doesn't it?
Mm.
And loses species, some of the little dinosaurs that you've been finding. Ali in Montenegro says, what are your hopes for the future? What are your upcoming expeditions?
Well, I mean, my hope for the future is that more people engage in, meaningful educational opportunities to learn about the natural world and climate and water issues. And certainly a lot of people do that on cruises. I mean, there's great educational opportunities. It's a great way to engage with the world. So I love seeing people that are involved in this sort of, ecotourism. For me, I have a lot of work this year here close to home in the Great Lakes. I'm working on a major educational initiative that we'll share with friends on the Viking experience. We'll actually be bringing augmented reality opportunities where you'll see holographic educational pieces involved with the Great Lakes. So I'll be working on that this year, and also heading back to Newfoundland to do some more exploration work, documenting 2 U.S. naval shipwrecks, among other things.
Gosh, it sounds absolutely fascinating, your world. And thank goodness you're recording it so the rest of us can watch it without actually having to quite do it ourselves. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you, Jill. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Anne. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, what amazing pictures. And for anyone watching, they can go to your website, obviously, which is intotheplanet.com, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Theplanet.com, or there is, if you just go on YouTube and look up Jill Heinerth, you're there all over the place telling people, it's you're there for divers, telling people how you dive and all the rest of it, for people who already know a bit about diving, but for others, just showing off that world that you see and most of the rest of us don't. Thank you so much for all you do. It's been absolutely brilliant meeting you. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you. And next week here on Viking TV is going to be Wildlife Week. And my guest is going to be Dr. Susan Graham. She's the chief exec of something called Dendra Systems. And she's going to be telling us how her drone technology is going to be used, or is being used right now, to reseed habitats for koalas. Great swathes of bush that were devastated by the recent fires in Australia. And what they're doing is they're creating something called koala corridors. She'll be telling us how they can do it, because the drones that she's invented, which are the size of a car, these amazing drones can reseed these whole habitats and grow the sort of eucalyptus and things like that koalas love. And so sort of help regenerate that part of Australia that was so devastated by fires, and helping beautiful little furry koalas. So we'll be meeting Susan next week, and she'll be able to tell us her story. Until then, do stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to meeting you again next Thursday. Bye-bye.